International Conference Saturday, as Laura said, and also during the second heat wave that we've had over the last few weeks as well. So fingers crossed we'll all get to the end of the day without melting. Thank you very much to Laura for starting us off today. Now, during this session, Anne and myself will take you through Core Strand 3. Now, during National Conference 1 back in June, the focus was realistically on whole school setting approaches to inclusion and the strengths and weaknesses of whole setting inclusion processes. This session then, Core Strand 3, builds on that a little bit more to think about some of the key challenges that might create barriers to whole setting approaches, and also to consider collaboration, team working and networking as being supportive. Again, Laura alluded to this in the earlier introduction. As you saw last time, and as I've popped up in the chat this morning, we're having a little bit of difficulty today in terms of posting files into the chat function. So if you would find it helpful to have a copy of the PowerPoints, unfortunately, we can't post them for you. But if you are able to open PLP in the background, you should be able to see, if you scroll across to the 2024-2025 National Conference resources, scroll down to the National Conference Saturday 2 tab, you will see all the PowerPoints for today and links to Padlets, for example. And Laura mentioned a few moments ago then as well about the assignment brief guidance being up on PLP. So you need to scroll right across to the right-hand side of the toolbar to, and there are some exemplars of assignments that are on there, all of which scored somewhere between 68 and 88% in terms of those. You should be able to access the exemplar documents, and if you scroll down to the bottom of the documents, you will see that the presentation that is recorded is kind of put in as a hyperlink at the bottom of those single Word documents. So thinking about where does Core Strand 3 sit then in relation to the assignment, in particular, you might find what we're looking at this morning might support you in terms of reflecting upon what provision for ALN you currently have in your setting, maybe in terms of thinking about alternative approaches, and also suggestions as to how to overcome some of the barriers that you might have identified to inclusive practice. And this is a key one potentially in terms of how do you share and strengthen effective practice, and considering what evidence of that may look like. So we appreciate there's never a quiet time in school, so you may or may not as yet have had a chance to take a look at the readings and activities on PLP for this core strand, and it's absolutely fine if you haven't, so please don't worry. You will be able to join in with all the reflections and discussions today either way. But as a reminder, Core Strand 3 then is broken up into 4 subsections. So the first one was asking you to identify the importance of and challenges to collaboration and multi-agency working. Secondly, to explore the benefits of and challenges to working in and leading across clusters. Thirdly, to identify personal expertise and knowledge of techniques and approaches which support effective practice. And finally, to examine the sharing of best practice and measuring success, in particular of the ALN function and role. So the aims of the session between now and 11:30 then, and myself will go through these 4 key points with you. So we will think a little bit about the challenges to working in collaboration. We will think a little bit about the challenges to team working and networking. It's probably quite easy to sit here and think about barriers, but what we're actually going to ask you to do in our second activity this morning is to think a little bit more about how those barriers could be overcome. How we could perhaps better support team working and strengthen team working and networking. So we'd be really interested in your ideas there in terms of overcoming some of the barriers you might note. And we'll also think about the personal skills, attributes, attitudes, expertise that supports the role of the ALN, whether that's the ALN themselves, but as you've said all the way through your different modules, ALN is everyone's business, it's everyone's responsibility. So what are those wider skills that are important. And finally, in terms of sharing good practice and evaluating effectiveness. So how do we share good practice, but also how do we identify and measure this as well? This is a quick recap then of some of the asynchronous content. So if you have had a chance to look at PLP, you may have had a chance to engage with some of these readings and activities. So you might have had a look, for example, at how effective collaboration and multi-agency working is supported. You may have completed some of the leadership styles and skill audits in terms of identifying your own skills and strengths and areas to develop. For example, you might have set yourself some SMART targets in terms of developing those areas that you noted currently could be improved. You may have done some reading around cluster working, and we'll pick this up a little bit later on, as Estyn over the last couple of years have noted this as an example of good practice in terms of supporting ALN reforms in Wales, for example. We might have done some of the reading around different leadership styles and approaches that support cluster working, for example, distributed leadership, which might be viewed as mobilising leadership expertise at all levels across the school and across clusters potentially. And this is seen as being able to generate more opportunities for change and to build the capacity for improvement. So possibly something you might consider in some detail in your presentation as to how you might take good practice and move it towards excellent, for example. You might also have done some reading around facilitators of and barriers to collaboration, team working and networking. So team working may be defined as it is on PLP as involving more than one person in a process to achieve a goal, and an aspect that should be emphasised in the strategic management of a school organisation is forming a working team that is active, able to work together to achieve those organisational goals. And team working has been seen as important because it may support ongoing processes of planning, teaching, reflection on current practice, sharing of knowledge and ideas, solving problems together, and attending to relationships. So one of the reasons we ask you to spend quite a lot of time, for example, in the breakout rooms on these national conferences, is to try and give you the opportunity to build some teamwork and an informal networking together as a cohort. However, there are barriers to team working, with Hall, for example, suggesting that ineffective communication is probably the largest inhibitor to effective team working. And you might also have done some of the reading around how we measure the impact and success of the ALN co-role and the impact of practice and provision for learners. And how then do you share that best practice, and who might that best practice be shared with? So do you have particular platforms and networks to do that, for example? So moving on to the the substrands in a little bit more detail. And so substrand 1 was looking at collaboration and multi-agency working. So Florian and Spratt back in 2013, for example, suggested that a key feature of multi-agency working is the need for practitioners to work in collaboration with others. This effective collaboration, they suggested, could be seen to offer the means for improving education in terms of educational development, innovation, reform, research and strategy, and the sharing of resources and good practice. It is also, they suggested, really important in terms of reducing inequalities amongst settings and between learners. Policies and legislation within education, especially in relation to SEN and ALN, have sought to inform a range of both approaches and terminology surrounding partnership working and the idea of supporting joined-up solutions. The ALN Code for Wales, for example, has further reiterated and strengthened greater collaboration between practitioners and with children and young people and their families, in addition to practitioners from external agencies, noting that the principles underpinning the ALN system are collaboration and integration. And Todd, again back in 2013, suggested that multi-agency working is linked to numerous benefits, which may include improved services and joint problem solving, again reiterated by the ALN code, in that services working together help to ensure early identification and earlier implementation of appropriate support, and that this should support positive expectations, experiences and outcomes for all. So we are, in the next few minutes or so, going to move into our first breakout room activity. But just to set that in context before we do so, Robertson Simpson 2016 suggested that when working collaboratively or in a multi-agency way, that there are a range of stakeholders who are involved, and it is important to recognise that stakeholders may be located in different professions and include practitioners from a range of different community groups and support organisations, for example. Each stakeholder may hold their own perception and ways of working, and as underpinned by Welsh Government, children, young people and parents and carers are also key stakeholders, and their collaboration in processes is also vital if outcomes are to be appropriate and successful. So WEMF back in 2016 noted that ideally relationships between stakeholders within partnership working should be built upon solid foundations of mutual respect and trust, and with a common understanding of and a drive towards supporting children and young people. So having set that into context a little bit, we will in a few moments' time try going into our first breakout room activity. So what we're going to ask you to do in your breakout rooms this morning is to have a discussion around these 3 key points that are noted on the slide. So thinking about multi-agency working or collaborative working in your setting, for example, what do you see, if any, are the barriers to that currently? What might be the facilitators or enablers that support effective collaborative or multi-agency working? And within your context, who are the stakeholders that are involved? It might be interesting within your discussion groups as well to think about what the common and context-specific barriers, facilitators and stakeholders are, which are identified by your group. We will ask, please, as Laura said, that you keep your cameras and mics on as a group when you go into the breakout rooms. As we've noted before, the breakout rooms are not recorded, therefore it gives you an opportunity to have those conversations. And we would ask, please, if someone in the group is able to take on the role as scribe and potentially jot down some of your key discussion points to the Padlet that is noted on the screen. Now, before we try and open the breakout rooms, we have noted this morning that a couple of you are appearing as greyed out in your participant list, or in our participant list even, which means we might have difficulty in terms of putting you into one of the breakout rooms. So I don't really like naming people on screen, but I will need to in this case. So Florence and Joseph, at the moment we're having some challenges